Welcome to Capitol Hill. In a matter of less than 24 hours, the President of the United States has been and gone from Canberra. But while he was here, he and the Prime Minister announced a new US troop presence in Australia, and he tied together the threads of remarks over the past week into a statement of intent of his administration on increasing strategic, military and economic engagement in the Asia-Pacific region. While he denies it's the case, his speech and the announcement on troops are being interpreted as a response to China's rise. Joining me to discuss the day are Liberal MP Josh Frydenberg and Green Senator Rhiannon. Welcome to you both.
Good afternoon.
First, to the comments of the President on the state of the alliance between Australia and the United States.
This is the alliance we reaffirm today, rooted in our values, renewed by every generation. This is the partnership we worked to deepen over the past 3 years. And today I can stand before you and say with confidence that the alliance between the United States and Australia has never been stronger. It has been to our past. Our alliance continues to be indispensable to our future.
Josh, it will be news, wouldn't it, if the relationship between the two countries was anything other than strong?
Absolutely, Lyndal, and I think the President's visit's been very successful and welcomed by our side of politics. It was an emphatic statement of the health of the alliance and of the President and his country's commitment to the region, and I think the way he enunciated our shared values, our historic relationship, the important strategic challenges that we face, as well as the health of our economic relationship, may I remind your viewers, the most important economic relationship Australia has.
Lee, the alliance has been a bedrock of foreign policy for Australia for decades. Does it serve us well?
Oh, look, the Greens certainly think it does need to be renegotiated. The ANZUS alliance is something that we don't support in its current form, but we do believe that it needs to be restructured so it fits with our international and human rights obligations. But going back to the speech today, certainly I found personally being in the chamber obviously very interesting, but it was not a good neighbourly speech. Both Indonesia and China have already raised their concerns. And so I think that I do think there is a serious concern about some aspects of how China works, human rights, lack of democracy. It's certainly growing at an enormous rate. But military solutions and military options are not a solution here.
Well, we'll hear now a bit of the President's speech and his statement of his intent on the Asia-Pacific region.
After a decade in which we fought 2 wars that cost us dearly in blood and treasure, the United States is turning our attention to the vast potential of the Asia-Pacific region. In just a few weeks, after nearly 9 years, the last American troops will leave Iraq, and our war there will be over. In Afghanistan, we've begun a transition, a responsible transition, so Afghans can take responsibility for their future and so coalition forces can begin to draw down. And with partners like Australia, we've struck major blows against al-Qaeda and put that terrorist organization on the path to defeat. Here we see the future as the world's fastest growing region and home to more than half the global economy. The Asia-Pacific is critical to achieving my highest priority, and that's creating jobs and opportunity for the American people. With most of the world's nuclear power and some half of humanity, Asia will largely define whether the century ahead will be marked by conflict or cooperation, needless suffering or human progress. As President, I have therefore made a deliberate and strategic decision. As a Pacific nation, the United States will play a larger and long-term role in shaping this region and its future by upholding core principles and in close partnership with our allies and friends.
Josh, there were some pointed references in the President's speech that could easily be read as being aimed at China, particularly on saying the US would commit militarily, wouldn't draw down its defence spending in the Asia-Pacific region, talking about economic rules. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, I think anyone who's getting upset about that is overreacting, because it's really an extension of what Australia and the US have been doing for a number of years in terms of joint exercises, training, troop rotations and so forth. Look, to Lee's earlier point about wanting to renegotiate the ANZUS alliance. I think the Greens are in la-la land when it comes to that, because the ANZUS alliance is so important to Australia's security. We only spend 1.9% of our GDP on defence. The United States spends 4.7% of their GDP on defence. They underwrite security in our region with more than 60,000 troops in Japan and in Korea. Without that US troop presence in our region, without that commitment to safeguarding our interests around the globe, I think we would be a lot worse off.
Lee, you mentioned concern raised in China about particularly the increased presence of US troops in Australia. Your leader Bob Brown said on Wednesday that Australia should be taking an independent line, not taking a side that might upset our neighbours from India through Indonesia right to China. When have the Greens been worried about upsetting China? Because you've taken strong stands on things like Tibet and some Chinese investment in Australia. Why should we be worried about upsetting China?
It's the context. It's when you do it in a military way that clearly that's not wise. It's not wise for Australia's future. It's undermining the peace and security of this region. And I think in time, more and more Australians will come to realise that the Australian government, with the support of the opposition, have taken us down a dangerous course here. And with regard to the amount of money that's spent on the military in this country, it does actually add up to $32 billion. Now, I think it comes out to about it certainly comes out to about $80 million a week. Now, it's a huge amount of money, and right now, when you consider the level of poverty in the world, we shouldn't be looking to increase that spending. And at the moment, military is the only area quarantined from cuts.
But are you saying that we should set our defence posture in order not to upset China? Should that be the yardstick?
No, look, it's the key aspect here, and Senator Bob Brown has set it out very clearly, and that is that we should be independent. And at the moment, the Australian public have not been provided with enough information about what is actually happening with the build-up of US troops, US naval presence, US Air Force operating out of our country. And that information needs to be provided. And with regard to the ANZUS Treaty, where it has not served us well is that we have not been independent. We're not being independent at the moment. Both the opposition and the government, with very little information, have signed off with a deepening of a militarisation of Australia that is wrong for our economy and wrong for peace and security in the region.
Lee, can I just say, I think we're living in a pretty dangerous neighbourhood. North Korea, a rogue country, has a nuclear program. In the South China Sea, we've seen aggression from China, which was actually referred to directly by the President in his address today. And we've seen other problems that could give rise to a miscalculation and a strategic confrontation. Australia needs to be prepared for this. It's a utopia to think that we don't need to invest in our military, as the Greens seem to imply, nor that we should have a robust alliance relationship with the United States.
If we could move on.
Both those statements at the end were a misrepresentation of our position. It's about being independent here. It's not about having no military spending.
What does that mean?
Well, at the moment, we have just once again the fifth visit of a US president, and once again, Australia is just signing off with the US, as did Mr. Abbott today, with minimal information about what is an extraordinary level of military engagement, military presence by foreign.
It's only 2,500 troops at the maximum for 6 months of the year.
They're not just the troops. Let's remember, it's the planes, it's the submarines, it's also the naval ships.
Look,
it's considerable.
The Indonesian president addressed our parliament recently. The New Zealand prime minister addressed our parliament. Famously, John Howard had the United States president and the Chinese leader in consecutive days. I mean, this is ridiculous for you to suggest that this is a major reorientation for Australia.
But what's ridiculous about saying Australia should be more independent?
If I could move on now to the economic part of the president's speech and his speech on human rights. Lee, the president wants open trading rules, wants trading rules that everybody lives by in the region, and say increased trade, increased economic engagement is one way to bring prosperity to people, to lift them out of poverty. Do you think that is the way to do it?
Oh yes, obviously there's considerable merit in there. But there was actually a major contradiction in what the President said, because on the one hand, he talked about his passion for creating more jobs, but a large part of his speech was about military engagement.
But he also talked about wanting to uphold human rights values, wanting to pursue democracy. He talked about all those things as well.
But I think if we look at where the bulk of his speech concentrated on, and I did want to bring the 2 points together, jobs and the military, the engagement, that when money goes into the military, unlike investment in a productive economy, it's not creating further jobs. It's only creating further jobs in the military. And that's really limiting the growth and the economy. And that's a very unwise aspect. And let's remember, so much money already goes into the military, $1.6 trillion a year. It is time we diverted some of it to relieving poverty.
Josh, if I could go to the President's push particularly to China to open up its rules. Sure. Do you think it's realistic to expect China to do that?
Look, I think it's realistic to expect China to be a responsible stakeholder when it comes to the trading environment. And for Australia, when Lee talks about jobs, the best thing that we can do is encourage free trade in the world. And I noticed that the Greens policy is to abolish all our bilateral free trade agreements, including the one we have with the United States. This is ridiculous. And the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Australia and the US have been driving together, is a great thing, because the multilateral Doha round has stalled, and now a Trans-Pacific Partnership bringing at least 9 countries will encourage free trade, and I think that's going to create more jobs for Australia as an exporting country.
Josh, how can you say it's a great thing when the bulk of it's secret? And that's the US is driving
What's
this?
Secret? It was discussed. You guys are living in a cave, Lee.
But no, it's not. Okay,
Everyone else is aware of the details.
No, the details in terms of what the pharmaceutical industry, what the tobacco companies, that's only... Some of that's only just leaking out. The US have requested that the bulk of the agreements are kept secret, and I'd really be surprised if you deny that.
I'll give you one detail, which is since the free trade agreement has come into place between Australia and the United States, investment has doubled. Now that is a great thing for Australia, and that is a major fact that you should be aware of.
Yes, but we're losing out here, and we need to know the details.
If I could go to now the question of human rights, President Obama made it clear that he would pursue human rights, upholding democratic values, made it clear that democracy is important and is the best system. Lee, given that the President's given the weight of his office, the weight of his administration to this, do you expect that he will continue to pursue it, pursue Burma and North Korea and potentially China as the US has done?
Well, we would hope so, and I thought there was one interesting phrase he used when he talked about saffron robes. And many people are aware that there's these tragic developments in Tibet at the moment where priests, where the people have been burning themselves alive. But he didn't go into details. So about that end of the speech, in one way it was impressive, but again, stacked up against the heavy emphasis on the militarisation of the region, I thought it was lacking in detail.
I think he talked very graphically about the failure of communism and fascism and how democracy is the way of the future. And I think pointing to the successes we've recently had in Burma was very significant.
And that's where we'll have to leave it. Josh Frydenberg and Lee Rhiannon, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Join us at the same time tomorrow.